Good afternoon from Olympia, Washington. My name is Bobby Johnson, and yes, I do work at Auth0. It's Wednesday, February 27th of 2019. Thank you for coming to check out my stream. Today we're going to be adding authentication to a Vue.js application. We'll be starting with a sample app, and you can find that app right here. And give me just a second, and I will give you a link to that as well. There you go. And if this is your first time checking out my stream, I kind of have a flow that I like to use that keeps me on task. And that flow is that I use a project board on GitHub for each individual streams that I do. Hi, Moxarty. How you doing? Thanks for joining me. So the project board, basically I'm working in this particular repository on this stream, and I want to accomplish several things during the stream. So I go and I create a project board on that particular repository that I'm going to be working on, and then I add in some tasks about the various things that I'll be doing during the stream. So we can just dive right in and get started with the very first card in there, which is to introduce Auth0 and identity as a service in general. Auth0 is where I work, like I said previously, but I'm not sure why I'm waving at my microphone. I'm using this as like your disembodied head that I'm talking to, and you're kind of obnoxiously close to me. It's kind of weird. Anyway, so Auth0, we are an identity as a service company. What we do is we provide universal authentication and authorization for web, mobile, and legacy applications. And by that, I mean traditional web-based applications built on platforms like, say, ASP.NET, Rails, or Java, right? And we offer several features that you might be interested in and why you might choose us for your authorization needs. We offer single sign-in, universal login, breach password detection, user management, multi-factor authentication, passwordless, and on and on and on. But from your implementation standpoint, what I'll be showing today is you really need to just build your front-end applications to be able to consume an OpenID Connect identity provider. And your backend services need to be able to authorize access based on Auth0 based access tokens, right? So you code those couple of things provided with some SDKs that we provide you. And then you get a bunch of features out of the box that we implement for you that you don't have to worry about implementing. Just as a little note about how successful we've been excelling this particular service, we have over 5,000 enterprise customers, and we on average handle about 80 million authentications a day. So yeah, we're a pretty decent product out there, and it's better than rolling your own. So definitely check us out. Going back to the board, I'm done with that. Let's take a look at the sample Vue.js application. If you go to the repository, which I've already linked into chat, what I have on my local machine is a fresh clone of this repository. So there are several sections to the README, basically documenting how I got this sample application, how to get started on your end. So if you clone the repo and try to work along with me, you may not be able to keep up with me when I start going really fast, but when I repost this stream as a video, you can pause and kind of follow along all the steps that I do. And the getting started section is your quickest path to keeping up with me and still running. When you open the project, you should be prompted for a set of code extensions that I'm going to be using. So if you happen to ask, hey, how are you doing that REST thing directly in Visual Studio Code, you'll find those extensions here, Visual Studio Code extensions here. Let's see. Yeah, that's about all we need to say about that. Let's go ahead and hop over to the editor and kind of go through the code base itself, what we have so far. Can you guys see that okay? Are the fonts big enough? All right, I'm just gonna keep continuing unless you guys let me know it's too small for you. So the structure of this sample application is fairly simple. There are 4 directories. One is called client, and that contains our Vue.js application that we'll be working on. We have a docs directory, which right now only has a bunch of images that I use in the README. So that right now we're not going to be concerned with at all. We also have a server directory, which contains our backend application. And that application is very simple. It is a Express.js application. And that Express.js application serves up a bit of data. We have some private data, we have some public data, and we expose it through 2 endpoints. Yes, I can zoom in. Bam. Is that better for you? Let me know if you need a little more. So really there are just 2 endpoints in this backend service. There's a API battles public and an API battles private, and they serve up the public and private data on those endpoints. Very straightforward. If you're not that familiar with Express, we're not going to be doing a whole lot in the backend services until near the end of the stream. All right. So pretty straightforward there. The final piece to mention is that there are a series of scripts in the scripts directory. These are bash scripts. The init script just ensures that you can start the client application and the server application, and that you have all of the necessary libraries loaded. So I'm actually going to go ahead and run that because I haven't done it yet. So if you're not familiar with bash script, basically what this does is it looks inside the client directory, checks to see if there's a file called .env, and if there's not, it copies the sample file to the .env file, to a new env file. It does the same thing within the server directory, and it also does an npm install in both directories because they're 2 separate applications, even though they're combined in the same repository, just for convenience sake, right? So if you pull the repository down, the first thing you want to do is run the init script. And once you've run the init script, you should be able to run the start script and actually be able to view the application. I'm going to go ahead and do that right now. So I use NodeMon to fire up the backend services. So if I make any edits in those files, it'll automatically restart for me. And then I just use the Vue CLI to stand up the Vue application. And we can see right here, the application is hosted on localhost. So let's go take a look at it. Localhost 8080. So there are 2 pages with this application. There is the default page on the home route that shows you the public data, right? And then we have a private page which shows you the public data. And the public data, you know you're viewing the private data because the headers all show up as red, right? Kind of makes sense there. And we have a button down at the bottom that lets us flip back and forth between the 2 routes, right? So the home route, the private battles route, fairly straightforward. Up in the upper right-hand corner, we also have this little common user widget like you see on every website today that lets me know that I am currently anonymous. I'm not logged into anything. And I just really love the Chaos Monkey, so I use Chaos Monkey as my default profile. And I have a couple links here to log in and log out under the drop-down menu for that widget. Those things currently do absolutely nothing. These are the things we're going to be implementing today. So hopping back over to the board, we are done. Well, not yet. Let's actually look in the editor as well and kind of look at how our client application is structured. So in the client application, under source, we have a handful of folders. We have some assets for images. We have some components. I have an app nav, which is the navigation bar across the top of my application. We have a user widget, which is the little widget in the upper right-hand corner. We then have a couple of views, one view for public battles, one view for private battles. And we have a directory for services. And the only service we have right now is to call our backend API to fetch our public and private battles. And you can see that code is pretty straightforward. I'm using Axios to get public battles. I basically call the API using Axios and grab the response data. And right now, private battles behaves exactly the same way. All right. Okay, is there anything else interesting in here that you guys might like to know about? My app structure is fairly simple. I just pull in the app nav and then render out the app nav and whatever the router view is for my particular application. My router is pretty straightforward. I pull in my two views. I tell Vue to use a router, and then I define my two routes. Pretty straightforward. Let's see, anything else of interest in here that you guys might care about? I don't think so. So this app I actually created using the Vue CLI. So, you know, Vue init, I believe Webpack is what I used. So the only thing that's really been modified out of this from that template is just the Vue code that I've added, the like .vue components that are in there, right? So fairly straightforward. Back over to the browser, we're done introducing the sample Vue.js application. Let's start with adding authentication using OpenID Connect. If you're not familiar with OpenID Connect, it is an open standard that is built on top of the OAuth0 open standard. And they kind of get confused a lot because of that. Before OIDC, which I'll start referring to it that way, was an open standard, companies like Facebook and Twitter tried to use, or did use, OAuth and their authorization flows to mimic a authentication flow using OAuth0. So sometimes when you go and you search for authentication to Facebook, you find a lot of information about using OAuth0 to do that. OpenID Connect was intended to differentiate two different scenarios. One scenario that OAuth0 was actually designed to handle is delegated authorization. So let me give you an example of what that means. Say we are users of LinkedIn, and I am a user of LinkedIn, and I build my social network on LinkedIn through people I've worked with and that sort of thing. But I also use Gmail, and I keep all my contacts in Gmail. Wouldn't it be nice, some engineer says at LinkedIn, if we could connect to your Gmail account and get a list of your contacts, your business contacts or whoever, and send them an invitation to join you on LinkedIn, sort of thing, right? One way that you've seen that kind of scenario played out over the years is that LinkedIn, maybe they do this, maybe they don't do this. It's just an example. LinkedIn would say, hey, give me your credentials to GitHub or Gmail, and we will log into your Gmail account, pull your contacts for you, and send them an email to invite them to LinkedIn, right? And that was a very common pattern. You even still see this in the banking industry in some places. But that's very dangerous. And the reason that it's dangerous is that giving your credentials, your GitHub credentials to LinkedIn doesn't just give LinkedIn the ability to harvest your contacts and your maybe send emails on your behalf. It gives you access to everything. It gives LinkedIn access to everything that you can do in your Gmail account. So they can add contacts. They can delete your emails. They can delete your contacts. Pretty much anything you can do in your Gmail account, you've just given LinkedIn the ability to do. Another negative aspect of doing it that way is that LinkedIn is not as concerned with your Gmail credentials as Gmail would be, right? The credentials for your Gmail account are mission critical to Gmail, but LinkedIn, you hand them your Gmail credentials, maybe it's not so they're not so concerned with that, right? And I'm not necessarily saying anything bad about LinkedIn engineering. I'm sure they're all good guys, but you see the kind of security concerns that you run into. And that was a scenario that OAuth was intended to solve, basically, right? So you go to LinkedIn. LinkedIn says, hey, go over to Gmail and authenticate, and we're going to ask them to give us some permissions to access your contacts, maybe send emails on your behalf. And that's the only permissions they're going to have when you grant that, right? So when Facebook and Twitter and some of the social providers started to add authentication through OAuth flows, it presented a problem, right? Because there was no uniform standard way of defining authentication through OAuth. And OpenID Connect is intended to solve that problem. OpenID Connect is based on top of OAuth 2. It adds a few things to it. And if you're very curious about the transition through the years, through the layers of authentication mechanisms, I give a talk called Identity 101. So find me at a meetup or invite me to come talk at your meetup, and I'd be happy to kind of talk about how we got to where we are right now. But just know that OpenID Connect is about authentication. OAuth is about delegated authorization. All right. If you walk away from this talk, this portion of my stream, learning nothing else, that distinction is very valuable. So we're going to start by adding an OpenID Connect authentication mechanism into our Vue application. So let's go ahead and jump into it. I'm going to start by giving myself another terminal here, and I need to add a node module to my Vue application. So I'm going to change directory into client. I'm going to tell npm to install Auth0-js. Hey, my jolly, good to see you. I'm really just getting started, man. So settle in, pop a brew, whatever it is you do to stay happy on stream. How is my audio right now? Are you guys able to hear me fairly well? All right, so Auth0-js node module is installed, and I'm going to start in my services directory here, and I'm going to create an auth service, right? So let's start with that. And let's see. The first thing I want to do is I want to pull in my Auth0-js. So import Auth0 from Auth0-js. And I want, this actually gives me a constructor that I can use to hand in some configuration values. So I'm going to start with newing up a new WebAuth object. So const auth is new 0 WebAuth. And we need to give this object a few bits of information about our Auth0 instance. At a minimum, we need to give this our Auth0 domain. So domain. We need to give it a client ID. And I'll show you where to get these things in just a minute. I'm just kind of defining what the base information is that we need. And then we also need a redirect URI, and I'll explain what that is in a bit. All right, so if we go over to the browser and we go to Auth0, I've already logged into Auth0, but you can go to our home page and click the sign up button and create an account. It's very quick and easy to do. And as soon as you're logged into that account, you'll be dropped into your dashboard, which looks kind of like this, right? And the first thing that I want to do is I want to create an application so that Auth0 knows about my Vue example application. So I'm going to go ahead and create that app real quick. What do we want to call this? Startup Battle. Yeah. And we have some options down here. Auth0 kind of guides us through the correct configuration for your application based on what application type that you're building. If you're building mobile or desktop applications, you'll want to use native app. If you're building like CLI tools or tools to communicate between two different machines, machine to machine is what you would want. And if you're doing something more traditional, like I was talking about before with ASP.NET, Java, Rails, you'll want to do a regular application, right? But we're doing a single page application. So that includes Angular, React, Node, all those things. So I'm going to select single page application, hit create. And you'll notice we offer you a handful of quick starts. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to jump right into settings. And here's where we get the information that I was talking about earlier. We have a domain and we have a client ID. We also have a client secret. And just to be clear, since we're doing a single page application, meaning the code is actually executing in the user's browser, not on our web servers itself, we never want to send the client secret down to a client. Right, that is really for your mobile workflow and your traditional application architectures, right? So these two bits of information are what we need to supply the Auth0 object. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to hop back over here to the editor, and I'm going to open up my .env file. And the first thing I want to put in my .env file is my Auth0 client and domain. Right. Go ahead and open that up. And this client ID is wrong, so I'm going to go grab the right one. Copy. I'm going to pop that in there. And if you're not familiar with using environment files like this in Vue, it does come standard out of the box with the latest Vue templates. The catch is you need to remember to prepend your environment variable names with Vue app. If they're not prepended with Vue app, Vue will just ignore them completely. I believe React works exactly the same way. So to access these values, the way that I need to access them back here in in my Auth.js is you do process env. And thanks, Visual Studio Code. That was awesome. env, and then the name of the environment variable. So that's my domain. I'm going to grab that. And then I need my client ID. And then my redirect URI is something special. So what we're doing is we're basically using Auth0 as our identity provider. So when we click the login button, what's going to happen is our browser is going to be redirected over to Auth0. And you're going to put in your username and password or whatever features it is that you want to use, or authentication mechanism that you want to use to authenticate. And once our identity provider is satisfied that you are properly authenticated, it's going to send your browser back to us. So this redirect URL is the place you want Auth0 to send people back to, right? So I'm going to pull this also out of my environment file. And I'm going to call it Callback URI. Like so. And then in my environment file, I'll add that in. And the value that I want to use is, you know, my local host. 8080. Except I'm going to create a special route, and we'll get to it in a little bit. But that route is going to be callback. Right. Any questions so far? Am I going too fast or not explaining it very well? Go ahead and hit me up in chat and let me know. So let's see. So since we're going to be authenticating using OpenID Connect, the way we do that is we pass in some scopes to this WebAuth item. So I'm going to go ahead and hand that over. And scopes are not permissions per se. They're the realm of things that you're capable of doing within the application itself, right? Does that make sense? So the scopes that we care about right now is we want the OpenID scope, and we want the profile scope. And then we need to let Auth0 know how we want it to respond to us with the authentication information. Since we're doing a single page application, we'll want to have the tokens passed directly back to us. And the way we do that is with a response type. And the response type that we want is token. And we also want ID token. Right? And now the Auth0 WebAuth plugin, or not plugin, or node module is properly configured to be able to do authentication for us. And the way that we're going to do that is by creating a service that Vue can consume itself. So I'm going to start that with a class called Auth Service. And it extends event emitter. So I need to import the event emitter. And I believe that's events. Yeah, there we go. And then I want to export this so that people can consume it. And to do that, we do an export. It's the default because we're not going to be exporting anything else out of here. New auth service. Bam. So why don't you like that? Oh, because I misspelled default. No, not default status. Visual Studio, stop helping me. You're getting as bad as Visual Studio. All right, there we go. So I pulled in event emitter because we're extending it. And then I just export an instance of this auth service object that we have ourselves. Let's see. And the thing that we want to be able to do in here is we want to be able to log in. And our login method is going to take in some custom state. This is part of the Vue.js eventing. So like that. And when the login event is raised, what we want to do is we want to call auth.authorize. And we're going to pass in a little bit of information in there as well. App state. Handing that information off to the Auth0.js node module. And my ESLint settings right now doesn't like something about this particular bit of information, bit of logic. I'm just going to comment it out right now because I don't want to figure it out. So there we go. That is commented out. Is that good? All right, so once we've called authorization, like I said, Auth0 is going to send control back to our application, and we need to be able to handle the authentication data that it's sending to us. So I'm going to create a function to do that as well. Oh, wow. And I'm going to make this a promise. So I'm going to return a new promise. Because there is some asynchronous work going on here. So resolve and reject. That auth ParseHash. So when I call the handle authentication method or function, what's going to happen is I'm going to use the Auth0.js library to parse hash. And what that means is when Auth0 sends our browser back to our application, it uses a part of the application URL called the hash. And I'll show you that in the browser itself. This little hash mark right here denotes the hash portion of the URL. Everything after that hash is considered the hash portion of the URL. So it sends our token data, token information back to us as hash values. And the ParseHash method basically looks at the hash in the URL and pulls the bits of information out of it that we need to authenticate the user. So back over here to the code. So ParseHash is also asynchronous because it actually does some lookup and validation for us. So I'm going to hand it a callback. All right, and what don't you like about my function here? Expected this. Yeah, thanks. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is we want to handle any errors that we might get back from parsing that hash. So let's do that first. Error. And because this is a promise, really all we need to do is just reject the promise chain. Like that. And if everything is okay, what we're going to do is we're going to say this dot local login, the auth result. Basically, we're going to take some bits of information out of the authentication result and store them locally. So I'm going to create an function that will do that logic for me. And then we just resolve. And we should be good to go. So now we need to define this local login function. And this takes a auth result. Like that. this.id token equals auth result .id token. And I don't currently have any properties for storing that particular value, so I'll just go ahead and create one real quick. Like that. And then one of the nice things about using the ParseHash method down here is once it's validated the token that we received, the ID token, it actually deconstructs that into a JSON object of our profile information. And that's a part of the auth result itself as well. So I'm going to capture that as well so that we can use it in our UI. No. So profile. So we're grabbing those locally. And then another bit of information that is available to us in the auth result token is an expiration. Each token has an expiration that is issued to you. And if we go back to the browser itself, under our Startup Battle application, we can see that our expiration time is 36,000 seconds, which I believe that's an hour. Someone correct me if I'm wrong. But basically, our token will no longer be valid after an hour. So we need to keep track of that expiration to where we can do something with it, right? So back over to the editor, and we will create a field for our expiration. Let's see, token expiry equals null. And then down in our local login, we will populate that value. So this dot token expiry equals a new date. Dot profile dot exp. EXP is a standard claim in OpenID Connect. You can always rely on it being there. There are a handful of standard claims that are defined in the spec. You can add additional claims if you want to. So we need to multiply this by 1,000 to make it work right. So that is our token expiry. So we're now caching our ID token, a JSON object of our profile, and the expiration date of our ID token. The last thing we need to do, because this is an event emitter, we need to actually raise the event that a login has happened. So this.emit and I'm going to raise an event called login event. And we just pass a JSON object along with that. And we're going to say we are logged in equals true. Profile that we received was the auth, or this profile. And the state of our application is the app state that we passed in for the login event itself. So that hangs off of our auth result app state. And if that happens to be null, I never want it to be null coming out of my application. So I'm just going to default to an empty object there, if that makes sense. Is everybody following me so far? Great. Okay, so we have a login method, a handful of properties in our auth service. We have a handler to handle the return visit from Auth0, our identity provider. We can handle authentication requests. The very last thing that we might want to do is provide a convenience method for checking to see if the user is currently logged in. So I'll go ahead and do that one. That, and I'm just going to return date now minus this dot token expiry, and let's see, local storage get item equals true. All right. Let's see. I think I skipped over something in our local login. I forgot to save a bit of information to local storage. So local storage set item, and I'll explain this in just a second once I get it typed out. Let's see. We need to set it and get it with the same key. So I'm going to add a field up here, just a const field. That. So if I come down, where was I setting that at? Set item, local storage key. Set it to true. That. And I want to get item using the local storage key as well. So that is our auth service. Now what we need to be able to do is to write a bridge between the service and Vue and how it expects to deal with authorization itself. And Vue has a plugin model that allows you to plug in chunks of the Vue pipeline as necessary. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create a plugin that we can insert into Vue that handles all authentication requests for us automatically, instead of trying to import my authentication service everywhere it needs to be used, right? It'll just be available as a Vue component itself. So to do that, I'm going to create a plugins directory, and then I'm going to create a Auth plugin. Like that. And the first thing I need to do is I need to import my auth service. Just like that. And then I'm going to use an default export. So Vue prototype. Auth equals my auth service. So and once again, my ESLint rules doesn't like how I'm doing this, so I'm just going to go ahead and disable it temporarily. I'm using the Airbnb rules, by the way, if anybody's curious about that. So the last thing we need to do is we need to define a mixin that says what to do with the particular events that my event emitter is creating. So Vue mixin, and we're going to give that an object, and we need to handle both the created and destroyed for the mixin itself, those functions. So created Why doesn't it like that? Why don't you like that? Comma dangle problem. I have a comma dangle problem. I thought I had that. There shouldn't be a comma dangle problem there. We'll see if it goes away once we have a full implementation there. Okay, so for created, what we want to do is we want to add a event listener for our login event. So if this.handle login event, then add a listener to it. So auth service add a listener for the login event. Handle login event. That. And then in destroy, we basically want to remove that handler registration. So if this.handle login event, then auth service.remove listener from login event, this.handle login event. Like that. Boom, boom, boom. Yeah. So what doesn't it like about this? Did I miss a brace somewhere? Let's see. Starting here. Install method, if I collapse that. That all looks pretty good to me. That, oh yeah, just in case there is another function maybe. Like so. Not giving me any complaints. All right, so now we have our Vue plugin for authentication. Now we need to actually wire it into our Vue application. And we do that in, let's see, I want to say that was in our main.js. So if I come over here to main.js, I need to pull in our authentication plugin. So import Auth Plugin from plugins auth, just like that. And then I need to tell Vue to use that plugin. So Vue use my Auth plugin. Yeah. Let's see. It does say I have an error somewhere, so I'm going to go track that down before we move on. What doesn't it like? Block must not be padded by a blank lines on line 14 of my auth service. So my auth service, is it the auth service? Services auth service line 14. Line 14. Did I have an extra space there? Nope. Oh, I might have extra spaces on this side. Oh, it doesn't like that. Wow. The Airbnb ESLint rules are like serious business. Okay, so that's good. Is that what was wrong with my plugin as well? That I didn't like? No, that all looks good. Okay, so where are we at? We're at main. We added our Auth0 plugin. What is left to do before we can start using it? I think we need to start working on our auth widget. So let's go ahead and start doing that. Inside components, inside user widget, we now want to consume our plugin. So to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to define some methods. The first one is going to be login. So I'll get started with that. And these are actual like button click handlers is what I'm defining at this point. And since we use the Vue.js plugin mechanism within the system, our authentication services are already wired up and handed to us from the Vue.js the Vue.js context itself. So I can just call this auth login, and it should send us off to the login, just like that. But we need to actually wire that up to our login button up here at the top. So I'm going to go ahead and reformat this because I think this might get a little bit long. So we can see what's going on. So back out like that. And to wire this up, all I need to do is add a click handler. .prevent. I want to say that's what that is. Yeah. Equals login. And so this syntax is pretty nice. What it does is it says, okay, handle the click event on this anchor tag, but prevent the default action, so I don't have to do anything in my JavaScript to basically send back a false or anything tricky like that. And it basically says call the login method itself. So assuming we don't have any errors down here in our console, I think that's all we need to have our login button refer us over to Auth0. Let's check our errors real quick and verify there's nothing horrible. I have one error in my user widget, a missing comma dangle. That's going to be getting me this entire time. I know it is. So let's go and add that comma. So right here. So let's head over to the browser and bring up the application and make sure it renders properly. Hey, Lannon BR, thank you very much for that subscription. I think you are officially the third person to subscribe to my stream. I really appreciate that. That's pretty awesome of you. And want to check in on chat just to make sure we're all together here. Mike Jolly, you subscribed as well. Thank you very much. Very cool of you. I appreciate that. Let's see. So looks like we do have a problem. Let's see if we can figure out what that problem is. So I see we have an error in my console. Let's go take a look at it. Error. Domain option is required. That's interesting. What would cause that? So I actually kind of know what this is already. Because we're serving our application up on localhost 8080, we need to tell Auth0 to add that URL to our CORS value for being able to call our identity provider. So if I come over to my application here in Auth0 and I scroll down to my allowed web origins box and just plug in my localhost and save that. Let's see, invalid on the web origins. Why is that invalid? Probably don't need that. Yeah, okay. So now if I come back and refresh, domain option is required. Am I not passing my domain option appropriately? Let's see. Let's go back to the code. What are you guys looking at? You guys are looking at my browser. So let's go back and look at the editor. And it looks like instantiating our auth service, we're not getting a domain value. View app auth domain. So let's come in here and check our env. We do have a domain value. What I suspect is going on here is that when we edit our .env file, Vue is not automatically picking up our changes. So let's restart it real quick and see if that resolves our error. You guys could try. I would love a bit war. That would be awesome. Okay, so we've restarted. I'm going to head back over here and refresh. And our console error has gone away. That's good. That's a positive sign. And now when I select the login option, it should take us to Auth0. But something blew up. Why is that? And if we look at the error message that Auth0 is giving back to us, it's telling us that we haven't configured our application in Auth0 right. We're missing a bit of information. Basically, we're telling Auth0, hey, our callback URL is localhost 8080 callback when we send the request to Auth0, right? But we need to actually tell Auth0 that callback URL is actually acceptable. So if I come back into my application configuration for the startup battle, and I come down to allowed callbacks, I can plug that in there. And you can have as many of these allowed callbacks as you want. So if you have a multi-environment setup in your workplace where you do local development, maybe you have a dev environment, a test environment, production environment, stuff like that, you can plug in as many of these as you need to. So I'm going to go ahead and save that, and then we'll go back to the app. Everything still seems to be working there. I'm going to go ahead and log in, and it takes me directly to the Auth0 universal login screen, and I can log in. But I really, really don't want to have to put in a username and password every single time I want to authenticate, because I think we're going to be doing that a lot in the next few hours. So I'm going to go back into my Auth0 dashboard and come down here to connections and social. And I'm going to go ahead and enable the GitHub social connection to where I can use GitHub to authenticate, which is kind of interesting, right? So I'm building an application and I'm using OpenID Connect to authenticate using Auth0 as my identity provider, but I'm telling Auth0 to use GitHub as an identity provider. So I'm kind of chaining through, right? So my application calls out to Auth0, which calls out to GitHub. Make sense? Okay, so I want to make sure that my application is enabled for this particular social connection. I'll add that in. I have some default values in there already. I do want to get an email address and the basic profile, like that's required of you. But if I wanted to get some extra information from GitHub, like say I wanted to be able to list your repositories or look at your gists or anything like that, I can ask for those permissions in this dialog as well. Right? I'm not going to do that at the moment, but at some future time, maybe we'll work on a application that requires that kind of interaction with GitHub. So I'm going to go ahead and save that, close it. And now when I come back to my application and I go to sign in, let me refresh and make sure it's working the way I expect it to. I'm going to go ahead and log in. And now when the universal login dialog box pops up, I have GitHub available for me to log in. Now I've actually logged in with GitHub already. So I'm going to say it's not my account. It's going to say, hey, do you want to log in with GitHub? And I still have username and password available to me as well if I want to. But I'm just going to go ahead and log in with GitHub. So what's going to happen is I'm going to get a consent form. And what the consent form is doing is it's telling me that Auth0, the application, the Startup Battles application, is requesting access to my profile. Do I want to allow access to my profile? And yes, I do. So it authenticated. And if we look up here in the URL, it might be really hard to see. I'm going to go ahead and copy this and bring it over into the editor to where we can take a look at what this URL looks like. Right? So new. My URL hands back to localhost 8080 callback. And then if you remember, I said we're using the hash portion of the URL. Here's where the hash portion begins. In that hash, we have an access token, right? And that's really all there is. So when our Vue.js application calls the ParseHash, what it's going to do is it's going to grab this access token and it's going to do some validation on it. And I'll show you what's contained in this access token for the moment. We'll go over to a browser, and we're going to hit a tool that we built here at Auth0 called JWT.io. I don't want to search JWT.io. All right. And what you can do with this is it's a JOT debugger. You can take your JOTs, your JSON web tokens, and plug them in here, and it will decode them and show you what information is involved inside the token itself, right? So I logged in with GitHub. You can see that my nickname on GitHub is not myself. My name is Bobby Johnson. I have a URL to my avatar on GitHub. The last time my profile was updated, who actually issued this access token, which it is my identity provider, my tenant on Auth0. And the subject of this token is my unique identifier for GitHub itself, right? Here's our expiration value. And then there's some other bits of information in there that, you know, are kind of beyond the scope of this stream, but you kind of get the idea, right? Your access token is really just a JWT giving you some information about the user who is logged in. Cool. So we're successfully getting back to the application, but we're not calling that ParseHash method. And the reason we're not doing that is we're not handling this callback route yet. So let's hop over into the editor and take care of that. So I'm going to nuke that text file. And to handle this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a callback view. So down here in views, where is it? New. Callback view. Let me open that up, and I'm going to start with my template. And I'm just going to make this kind of simple, but the reason we have a template here is just in case, for whatever reason, the parsing of the hash takes time. I want to put some kind of message up there for the user to be able to see that something is happening. All right, so that is pretty straightforward. And next up is our script. Like so, and we want to export default. And we want to call handle login. And it's going to receive some data. And then let's see, we also need a created. All right, so with these particular objects, the created gets called on instantiation. It's kind of like your constructor. And what we're doing is we're calling into our Auth plugin to handle authentication. And when the handle login event, we're also subscribing to that. It's going to give us some data. What we're doing is once the login has been handled, we're going to ask the router to push us either to our redirect route that might be coming through the URL, or we're just going to bounce you back to the root of the application itself, right? So what don't you like about this declaration of statement? What is going on? Why are my ESLint rules all ganky? Expected semicolon. Yeah. Well, I'm not going to mess with that for right now. So that's all our callback view is going to do. As it's doing these processing steps, we're going to show a paragraph tag saying something's loading, right? So now we just need to wire up our route to be able to handle that callback view. And the first thing we need to do is import our view. Like so. And then we're going to add a path. I'm just going to copy one real quick. That, and we're going to call this callback. And the name is going to be callback, and the component is going to be callback. Like so. And it looks like we may have some issues here. What's going on? Export default method. What don't you like about that? What is the one error? In callback view. On line 6. Where's my callback view? Right here. Did we get that? Let's see. What am I doing wrong here? View. Where is my callback view? All right. Can you guys see what I had different there? I do not see anything different. I have a template. I have a script tag. I'm exporting default. Huh. It looks correct to me now. And ESLint is not balking. So, okay, so now we have a route that can handle our callback. We've wired it up into our router. The last thing that we need to do, I believe, is to edit our user widget to actually take advantage of having the profile available to us when we come back, right? So you can see our callback is now processing there, and it looks like we have an error in Auth.js. Cannot read property exp of undefined. Oh, you guys can't see what I'm looking at. So I'm looking at the application. It refreshed on me when I saved the callback view file, and it's properly showing our loading prompt, but we're throwing an error deep in the bowels of our auth service, I believe, in local login on line 32. So let's go back and take a look at that. Local login, it does not like this profile expiry. So I'm actually just going to pick that off of the auth result itself. State does not match. Okay, so back over in the browser, because it took some time to actually process the callback, we're actually getting a unhandled exception in the promise chain itself. It's telling us that we have an invalid token. So I'm going to walk through the authentication again, just to verify that we are getting into the callback appropriately. All right. Log in. Log in as me. Bam. And we're not getting any errors, so it looks like we're handling the callback appropriately now. So back into the editor, what we want to do now that we're authenticated successfully, we want to change our login widget to show my name and my profile image from GitHub. So let's do that. We'll do it inside the user widget. So let's see. I am going to start with methods, I guess, and handle the login event. So when a login event is raised, I want to subscribe to that and store some information about the successfully logged in user. So handle event. It's going to give me some data. That, and I'm going to save the profile. And I'm going to save a Boolean that tells me whether or not the user is logged in. Logged in, like so. Throw that in there. And then I think my data needs to change shape. I want to have that logged in Boolean to where I can modify my template based on whether the user's logged in or not. And we'll default that to false. We should be getting a profile image from the authentication response, but I do still want to show the default avatar if we don't have one. And then instead of using name like this, I'm just going to have the profile be a part of the object. And we'll give it just an empty object for the false case, basically unauthenticated state. So I think that gives me all the info I need to start playing around up here in my template. And I want to change this name to be the profile. Let's see, where am I? Strong, yep. Profile.name. And if I don't have a name, I'm just going to go ahead and use the default. Actually, not default. Anonymous. Like that. So if my profile doesn't have a name, just use the name anonymous. And then let's see, where is my image? My image is right here. So I'm going to use my profile picture instead. And if that is null, then I want to use the default avatar. Right? Just like that. And I think that's enough. We should be able to go back into the browser and see that actually functioning. So I'm going to refresh, verify I've got no errors down here. I'm going to go ahead and authenticate. I am still me. And we got some errors. Yay, let's figure that out. Cannot read property name of undefined in the user widget. So back over here to the editor. Profile name. Is that really what we're getting? Let's see what we're actually getting. I kind of forget the shape of this object, so data.profile. See what that looks like. So refresh, log in. Undefined. I'm not getting a profile out. Why am I not getting a profile out? So data.profile in my event emitter, what am I sending out? This event logged in event, profile as this profile. What are we getting in data? Let's take a look at that. Just look at the entire object. Maybe I'm doing something goofy. Back over to the browser. I'm going to refresh, log in. All right, so what are we getting? We are getting a logged in true. We are getting an undefined profile. Why is that happening? I do not know. Let's head back over to the editor, and where are we assigning those values? We're doing it right here in the logged in event. Are we not storing the profile correctly? This profile, it's null there. Login, emit event, auth result. I'm going to dump this auth result object and see what we're getting. All right, back over to the browser. All right, so we do have our ID token, we have our expiration, we have our token payload. That should be our profile. There's all the data. I must not be pulling it out of the auth result correctly. It should be named ID token payload. Let's look at the code and see what I'm actually pulling out, because I probably messed that up. ID token payload. Let's see. Yeah, I'm just calling it profile, so I need to change that. I'm going to save it, head back over to the browser. Log in. Bam! Can a brother get some biddies? Very nice. So I am an authenticated user now. Let's do some cleanup though. I don't like the fact that the widget is, or the drop-down menu on my user widget constantly shows login and log out at the same time. I'd like it to show me the appropriate thing based on the authentication state. So let's implement that real quick. So I'm going to go back to my editor. And let's see, in my user widget, here's where my buttons are. So I want to say show the login button. If equals if we're not logged in. And then on the other side, we'll show the logout button. If we are logged in. All right, save that. Why don't you like my VF? What's up? No, oh, because I'm putting it in the end tag of the previous list item. Derp. Just a second. I have a sound for these type of minutes.
There's nothing wrong with this brain.
Yeah, there you go. Back to scenes. Well, I actually want it right here. And I'm going to go ahead and bring this around so it looks like the other button, the other link. Just where I can see everything. All right. So that's pretty good. I'm going to head back over to my browser. I am going to authenticate again. I only have a login option. You're the best, C. Payette. You're the best. All right, I'm authenticated. And I have a log out option. That's pretty good. Let's see, what else do I want to implement here right now? I think that's it. For adding OpenID Connect based authentication. I think we're done with that. One thing that I'll go ahead and pull this card over and be done with it. And the next one is to add automatic token renewal. And what this means is to solve a problem, right? And the problem is every time I refresh my page, I'm no longer logged in again, right? So I log in, I am authenticated. Okay, well, that's great. But if I refresh, I'm not logged in again. And like, that's a very bad user experience. Traditionally, when you like log into Twitter, you stay logged in for some period of time, right? You can go away, you can close your browser, you can come back, and it recognized, hey, you're already logged into the application. So it would be nice if our application handled that as well. So let's go ahead and start implementing that, and I'll show you how it's done. Back over to the editor. And while I'm thinking about it, what I would like to do is I want to get rid of all those console statements so I don't forget about them floating around in my application. So here's one. There is, you know what? I'm going to leave that one actually, because I want to be able to see, the information coming back from Auth0 to us, so I can pick it out and kind of show it to you as I go. So let's see, what is that? That's the service, auth service, local login. There's my console log. I want to disable no console for that line. All right. So before we move on to token renewal, I'm going to take a quick 5-minute break. Feel free to grab a beverage, stand up, walk around a little bit. Should only be a few minutes though. And then we'll move on to our next task. So.
What do you desire? What makes you itch? What sort of a situation would you like? I do this often in vocational guidance of students. They come to me and say, well, we're getting out of college and we haven't the faintest idea what we want to do. So I always ask the person, what would you like to do if money were no object? How would you really enjoy spending your life? Well, it's so amazing. As a result of our kind of educational system, crowds of students say, well, we'd like to be painters, we'd like to be poets, we'd like to be writers, but as everybody knows, you can't earn any money that way. Or another person says, well, I'd like to live an out-of-doors life and ride horses. Let's go through with it. What do you want? When we finally got down to something which the individual says he really wants to do, I will say to him, you do that and forget the money. Because if you say that getting the money is the most important thing, you will spend your life completely wasting your time. You'll be doing things you don't like doing in order to go on living, that is, to go on doing things you don't like doing, which is stupid. Better to have a short life that is full of what you like doing than a long life spent in a miserable way. And after all, if you do really like what you're doing, it doesn't matter what it is, you could eventually become a master of it. It's the only way to become a master of something, be really with it. And then you'll be able to get a good fee for whatever it is. Somebody's interested in everything. And anything you could be interested in, you'll find others will. But it's absolutely stupid to spend your time doing things you don't like in order to go on spending things you don't like and doing things you don't like, and to teach your children to follow in the same track. See, what we're doing is we're bringing up children and educating them to live the same sort of lives we're living. And so, therefore, it's so important to consider this question: what do I desire?
All right, so I am back. While I was away, did you guys come up with any questions or anything about what we've done so far? I'm going to take a look in chat and see if I've missed any comments, because I've just been kind of plowing along. So let's see. Lannon BR, thank you for the kudos there. I appreciate that. The next step isn't persisting the token. The next step is to basically implicitly authenticate the user when they return, right? So we are logged in to Auth0, our identity provider. When you hit our application, all we really need to do is just ask our identity provider, hey, is the current user logged in? Okay, give us our ID tokens, right? So I'm not actually going to be storing them anywhere because I don't want to make them available for any script to be able to get access to them and potentially hijack my account in my application. So I tend to avoid storing any tokens in local storage. Local storage is nice and convenient, but there is a possibility that someone could hijack your session and use that for nefarious things. So when I have tokens, I really only store them in the module itself, right? So in my authorization service here, that is the only place I am storing a token, right? It doesn't go anywhere else. Let's see. Looks like Mike Jolly had to head out. That's cool. Yeah, exactly. So we explicitly went through the authentication flow. The user was prompted to give us authorization for the claims that we're asking for. And because we're not expanding those claims in any way, we can, behind the scenes, just kind of ask our identity provider, hey, is my current user already logged into you? Just go ahead and do the thing without bothering the user with a prompt again, sort of thing. Hey, Ben. Nice to see you. Thanks for joining us. Carrie, let's see. I've never heard JWT being referred to as Jot. I don't know if that is a Auth0ism or that's kind of what the people in the security space call them, but everyone at Auth0 says Jot instead of JWT. Hey, Mike Jolly, you already left, but I'm glad you used JWT.io. Anyway, let's get moving. Let's see. The step that we're on is to add the automatic token renewal, and we're going to implement that in our auth service itself. So I'm just going to go ahead and scroll on down to the bottom here, and I'm going to add a new method called renew tokens. And this is going to be a promise because it's an asynchronous operation. I could use async await and all this code base, but I don't know. I've been using promises for years and I'm just kind of comfortable with them at this point. At some point, someone's going to force me to switch. So return new promise. Let's see, resolve. Reject. So, and we're going to check our local storage value. Item. And if that equals true, we are going to return, actually not equals true. I want it to not equal. There we go. I'm going to return a rejection. All right. Then auth check session. And that accepts a parameter object, but we're not really going to use that anyway. And once the session has been checked, we're going to hand it a callback, and we're going to get our auth result back. Result. So this dot local login with my auth result. Hand that around, and once that's finished, we'll go ahead and return a resolve. Yeah. So I am using local storage, but what I'm using local storage for is just to save a Boolean value of whether the user has logged in already into my identity provider itself, right? The tokens don't go in there, just some little helper bits that allow me to know that the user has already been authenticated ahead of time without having to talk to Auth0. So I check local storage to see if we have any value other than true. If we have like a false, or we just don't have that value at all, we know the user is not logged in, so we just reject with an error of not logged in. If we know the value comes back as true, we use the Auth0 library to check the session for the currently logged in user. You can pass some parameters in there around scope if you want to expand the scope of the user or not. There's some other parameters you can pass in. Those are for specific use cases that we're really not getting involved in at the moment. And once the session has been checked, we're going to get the exact same auth result we got from our callback method. So we can just pass that into our local login. And because the promise has resolved successfully or completed successfully, we just call resolve and it's good to go. So now all we really need to do is just call this renewed token somewhere, right? And where can we call it? I believe it is going to be, let me find it real quick. App. Cool. It is in my user widget, right? So if I come back over to the user widget down here in our actual code logic, we're going to add another method for created. So this is kind of like our constructor for our component, if you remember. Pull that out. And because once again we're using a Vue plugin for our authorization, we have direct access to that new renewed tokens method. So we can just call this $auth.renew tokens. Yeah. And I think that should implement it. Looks like we have one warning. Let's take a look at that. I bet it's a comma I forgot. Oh, no, it doesn't like my console log data. Thanks, man. I do want to keep that in there because we want to look at that information as we go through. So I'm going to go ahead and tell ESLint to stop being a jerk face. All right. Oh, it says we have an error now. What's the error? How can I go from a warning to an error by adding a comment? What? Expected to return a value at the end of an arrow function in Auth.js line 63. And it looks like I did not save. Bank. And it says we still have an error. What is the error now? I have an error, line 63. Return, resolve. What is it that it doesn't like? Return new promise. You know, I don't think that matters right at the moment. Let me pop back over here and see if we actually have our renewed token working. So I'm going to refresh. And I don't know if you noticed, but when I refreshed, initially the user widget up here has the anonymous chaos monkey. And in a couple milliseconds, it pops in with my appropriate profile information, right? So we have that implemented. Now, what's interesting about this is that I can't not be logged in now. I'm constantly logged in. We would have to have my user session and my identity provider time out before I would no longer be logged in. So I think the next thing on our list is to add an explicit logout, because we are done with token renewal. It was that simple. So let's go ahead and add the explicit logout. All right, and we are going to start with that in our service as well. So let's go back to the editor, pop into our auth service, and we're going to create a logout method. So the first thing we want to do on logout is to clear our token value in local storage. Remove item, local storage key. Get that on out of there. We want to clear our properties that we're holding our token and our expiration and profile in. So this.id token goes back to null. This.profile goes back to null. And this.token expiry goes back to null. So what we're doing so far in logout is we're removing everything in the browser itself that knows about the user being authenticated, but we also need to reach out to our identity provider and tell that we want the user to be logged out as well. And Auth0.js has a convenient method to do that, named appropriately logout. And once the logout is completed, we can hand off to the identity provider where to return the user to. So return the user to window .location .origin, which will basically return them to the root of our web application itself. The final piece that we need to do is we need to emit an event that logout has happened, that the user has been successfully logged out. So this emit. Let's see, what was the event that I was using up here? LoginEvent. This, and we're just going to tell it that now the state has changed to logged in is false. All right, and it still says we have an error. What is that error? It's driving me nuts. Let's see. Expected to return a value at the end of an arrow function. It's the promise itself it does not like. Let's see, that's on auth line 63. 63. So I'm returning a promise. I return here. Is that what I want? Yeah. Oh, that's kind of gross. Let's see if it still works. Okay. So done. Compiled successfully. No errors. Let's go test and see that our logout works. Actually, we can't yet because we haven't actually wired it up to our user widget. So we need to define a logout method. $auth.log.out. Right, and that is what I called it. Just double checking. Yep, log out. And we need to wire up our click handler for our login link. So at click .prevent equals logout. Okay, so back over to the browser. have our app, and we are once again just automatically logging in. So I'm going to click log out. And we get an error. And this is actually intentional. I wanted you to see this error to where I could explain it to you. It's saying there's something wrong with my configuration in my Auth0 tenant. I can see the error for details. It says the return to parameter in my query string parameter is not defined as an allowed logout URL. You have to be very specific about your callback URL, your logout URL, and your, I forget the wording. Give me just a second. I'll tell you what it is. Startup battle. Your allowed web origin. So Auth0 needs to add CORS entries for your allowed web origins, but then you explicitly have to tell it what the callback URL is, as well as the allowed logout URLs, which my allowed logout URL is the exact same as my CORS entry. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. Hey, Clark.io, thanks for joining, man. Happy to see you here. Let me pop back over, and then we'll try that logout again. So that's kind of funny. It actually did log me out, but it just refused to return me to the application because I hadn't done that configuration piece yet. So I'm going to go ahead and log in. Pop. I am authenticated. Ooh, what's this error? Oh, I am not logged in. What? I'll have to look at that in a minute once I've verified that our logout functionality works. Okay, so the logout functionality works. This promise is from our call in the user widget right down here where we tell it to renew the tokens. You remember that on the promise rejection, if the user's not actually authenticated, it throws an error at me. So I know that I'm attempting to authenticate the user. So I'm going to catch an exception. And I'm just going to log that out to the console. Because it's not really an error. It's an exception in the terms that you're trying to do something that requires an authenticated user and you don't have one. So I'm just going to log it out. So bam. And the warning, it does not like my console logs. Thank you, Vue compiler. Copy. Or ESLint, I should say. Yeah. So now let's go back and verify that all still works. And we can see I'm getting the not logged in prompt as auto refresh is happening. It correctly says I'm not logged in right now because I'm not. So I'm going to go ahead and log in. Bam, logging in with that GitHub. All right. And now I'm not getting errors down here. Something that's interesting is that we now are successfully authenticating the user. We have the profile. We can make decisions based on that profile, change the UI based on that profile. But even though I'm not logged in, I can still get to my private route. I need to secure that based on the authentication status of the user. So that is the next task that we have on our board, and we're kind of closing in on the home front. These last two tasks are kind of short. Shouldn't take too long. Then I will commit all the code and push it up to GitHub, and you guys can go in and look at it to your heart's content. So now we're going to secure the client-side routing. So if I go back into my editor, I also need to get my notes here in the right place. So branch. All right. And the way we're going to handle this is in our router. So in our router over here, we're going to add a restriction to the private battles route to prevent it, to require authorization, basically. So let's create a function up here that will handle that check for us. And this is kind of like Vue middleware. It's the idiomatic way of securing routes in Vue.js. And this function is basically going to check if auth, do I have it imported yet? No, I don't. All right, auth from plugins auth. That's not the one that I wanted. I want services. All right. If auth.is authenticated, just go ahead and call next. So otherwise, we'll redirect the user to the root of our application. Just bounce them out. You're not allowed. So path. So, and if we wanted to pass along a query string value so that we could theoretically kick off our authentication and bounce them back into our private battles area, you do it this way. Query redirect to full path. So, all right. So basically we have a middleware piece. We know we're going from one view to another view. So we have a reference to the view we're going to, a reference to the view we're coming from, and then a next method, which basically says, you know, call the next thing in the chain, in the middleware chain. We're checking to see if the user is authenticated. If they are, we're going to allow them to continue on the way that they wanted to go. If they're not authenticated, we're going to bounce them back out to the root of the application. And it's very easy to add this in. Basically, I need to go down to my private battles route and say before enter require auth. Bam. And that should be it. And I don't even have compilation warnings. Yay. Okay, so let's take a look at it in the browser and see how that behaves now. So if I refresh that and I go to private, I can't get through, right? I don't know if you noticed, but up in my URL bar, I have a query string redirecting me to private battles. So I'm basically looping through. So I've secured the route. You can't, through the application itself, get in without being logged in. So I'm going to go ahead and log in. And now I should be able to go and view my private battles. It's not letting me go. Why aren't you letting me go? No, don't do that to me. Let's get rid of this redirect stuff. I bet that might be screwing us up. All right, I am authenticated. Bam, bam, bam. Why you do that to me? Is my authentication not working? Let's see. Let's go add some logging and see if we can figure out what's going on. So back into the editor, up here in my function. Do I have my conditions backwards? No, I don't. So require auth. Did I put it in the right one? Yes, I did. Before enter, require auth. Console.log. You shall not pass. Bam, bam. Now back over to browser. Let's see what's going on there. It does seem to be redirecting me when I hit that button. Like it's not, my authentication is authenticated function is not working the way I expect it to. So this call to auth is authenticated is returning false. Why would it be doing that? Let's go look at auth. This is getting kind of long. Local login, handle authentication is authenticated. We're looking at the token expiry value, which should be a date, and whether local storage get item, local storage key is set to true. Tells me that the user is authenticated. So let's check local storage and see if that value is set to true. So pop it up in here. Local storage. Logged in. I am set to true. So that's not it. Is the date I'm storing wrong? Why don't we try logging it out? Back over here to the editor. Turn daytime now. I'm going to console log token expiry. See if that's gonna show us anything interesting. So bam, invalid date. Okay, so how are we constructing our token expiry? Did I mess that up somehow? So I'm going to get rid of this. It should be in local login, right? So this token expiry equals new date. I'm multiplying the profile by 1,000 instead of the actual expiration. So what does that look like again in the auth result that we get back? Expires in. That's the actual value that I want. So back to the editor, profile, bam. Why didn't you guys point that out earlier? Are you guys not paying attention? Do we need to have a talk? You guys are being horrible pair programmers. All right, well, whatever you want to do, man. So let's see if that resolves the issue now. So back to the browser. I'm going to get rid of all this redirect goo at the top. Bam, I am logged in. And now start up battles. I shall not pass again. So let me take a look over here. That's my plugin, my service. Oh, I see. Copy. It's not the expires in that I want. It is bam. There we go. I want to use the expiration from the profile itself. All right, the value there. So coming back over, let's make sure that we get fresh everything. Log in. Thanks, Carrie. That's cool. Clark, wait just a second, man. I have that for you. Editor. Bam. Let me connect. Do it. I forgot to turn it on earlier. But yeah, back to the browser. Let's log in with GitHub. Okay. And now start up battles. Hey, I have passed. Awesome. So now let's clean up all the nasty console logging that I've done because I'm a scrub. Let's see. Search console. Find it for me. No.log. Okay, so I do want to keep logging the error message. Let's see. I don't need to log this out. Let's see, in my router, I don't need references to Lord of the Rings in my code base because I am a Game of Thrones fan. I should say I am a Song of Ice and Fire fan. Yeah, and those are good. So my widget, save that. Everything is saved. So we have implemented we have implemented authentication with OpenID Connect. We've done it in a idiomatic way within Vue. We have prevented users from accessing routes they're not supposed to get to. We've implemented logout. All of that seems pretty cool. What else can we do here? Let's see. So we're logged in. You know, really, if I'm logged out on this page, it's kind of silly to actually have this Vue private startup battles if you can't actually do it. You know, I am programmatically on the client side preventing anybody from being able to go to that view, but I think a better user experience would be to not have that button displayed at all, right? So let's hop back over to our editor and wire up some conditionals on displaying that button. So if we go into our views and look at public battles, we have a button right here. Is that it? Yeah, view, private. Where to go? Yeah, cool. So what we can do is we can import our auth service here. Like so, and then we can define a isLoggedIn method for this view. We can return so like that. And then up in this big div right here, we can do a v-if equals quotes is authenticated. Ooh, failed to compile with 1 errors. Relative module not found. What don't you like? What doesn't it like? It doesn't like what? I am in my public battles. I'm going up a level to services. All right. There we go. So back to the browser. And it's still showing me that. View private startup battles. So what am I doing wrong? Do I have another error? No. Is authenticated. We checked that earlier by looking at our application local storage. I don't have the ticket or the value set to true, so I'm not sure why it's thinking I am authenticated. Back to the editor. I keep wanting to grab the handles on my editor and resize the window to make it bigger, which is going to completely screw up my view. But I keep resisting right as I get to it. So, anyway, so public battle is authenticated. Return auth is authenticated. That is my service, which is here. Whoa! Very nice. Token expiry. this should be working. Why isn't that working? Public battles. If is authenticated. Do these things. Here, let's try restarting the app. Hey, Clark.io, thanks for being here, man. I will post this to YouTube probably later today, so if you want to catch the rest of it, feel free to keep an eye on my Twitter or my blog, which you can find at these places, right? So you will find all the things there. Thanks for hanging out for a while. So scenes. Let's go back into the browser and see if that resolved it for us. So, all right, I'm anonymous. Why is it doing that? You're not. It's even telling me you're not logged in. You can't go in there. Why are you trying to go in there? Don't be a scrub. Where is it? Are we actually calling this? Console. All right, so back to the browser. It's not calling it at all. So why would that be? Public battles is authenticated. Did I misspell it? I bet I did. I would not be surprised by that. If I don't think that will make a difference, but it happens to be where I have it in my notes, so just in case. Router link, back over here, take a look. Nope. Editor. Any Vue ninjas in the channel see what I'm doing wrong? Let's see. Console log. Did I actually hit? No, I never did hit the question mark. Let's try this. Authenticated. Return auth is authenticated. And if we go back to the browser, it's not there. So what changed? Edited. So, oh, I actually am calling the method there. That's what was different. Sorry. So we can see that's been implemented now. If we go back to the browser, the only thing that changed from the code you saw me write by hand versus cut and paste is I call the method here instead of just handing it a reference to the method, which is kind of frustrating. So now if you're not authenticated, you don't even get the option to go to our private area. And when you log in, bam, our private startup battles show up. Pretty cool. So that is end-to-end implementing authentication and authorization in a single page application using Vue.js. There is one piece that is left to us. We have been very good developers and made sure that our front-end code is very secure. But what's interesting about that is that we also are querying an API, right? So if I come back over here and into my server directory, and let me close some of these files. I have this example HTTP where I can send requests against our API, and we expect the public API to return values to us. And we can see that it does return a bit of JSON to us. But I would expect that our private endpoint to require some bit of authentication to be able to return values. And right now it's not, right? So we're not totally secure at this point. Our front-end code is preventing users from clicking through the UI to be able to see that information. But anybody that can watch the HTTP traffic of the application can infer the location of this endpoint and just fetch the data using curl or something like that. So what we really need to do is we need to secure our API as well to accept those tokens. So why don't we implement that? So I'm going to go ahead and close out of that. And let's see, let's go back into my other terminal because we need to add some dependencies into the server. And let me get my notes to the right place. All right. And I'm going to close some stuff over here. And the things that we are going to add to be able to handle authentication in our API are node modules. So we'll use npm to install those. And I want to make sure that we save them. And we're going to use jwks-rsa, which is a cryptography library, and express-jwt. Add those in. All right, and so now let's go implement that in our server. So I'm going to do a little cake baking here real quick and just kind of show you the code and then explain it, how it works. I'm going to import our libraries. I'm going to move this .env to the top. All right. And what I want is I'm going to implement a function to do an authorization check, right? And that looks something like not that. Copy. Bam. So I am using the JWKS library to reach out to my well-known jwks.json for my domain. And let's actually take a look at that because that is interesting. Copy. Browser. I am not myself.auth0.com, well-known JWKS. So each tenant within Auth0 has this endpoint that provides you the public keys that are used for signing your tokens when they're generated by Auth0 in the backend. So what the JWKS library does is it fetches the public key values and caches them for a period of time. So we're basically caching for about 5 minutes just in case we cycle our keys. We can fetch the new values at some point in the future. And then we are using the Express JWT library to create some middleware that will ensure that the token that's coming through from the user, from the client side, is valid based on the public keys that are supplied from our Auth0 tenant. So this auth check constant at the end of the day is simply a endpoint or a middleware piece that can be consumed by Express. And to do that, you just add it into the middleware chain for the given route that you want to secure. And that's pretty much it. We just secured the backend endpoint. If I bring up my example HTTP, we should still be able to hit the public route. We should be able to not be able to hit that. We are not. We are unauthorized because we don't have a access token. And you guys can see that, yeah, because we're doing it in the editor. So now we need to do a little bit of configuration inside of Auth0. We're actually going to define our API. So we're going to go to the API section of our dashboard, and we're going to add a new API. And this one is going to be called Startup Battle. And our identifier, also known as an audience, is going to be called Startup Battle. And we're going to create that. It looks like I already have one with an identifier of Startup Battle. Where is that? I don't see that. Where is it? Oh, I see what it is. So I'm going to edit this one real quick and change this to something else, or just delete it. I'll go ahead and delete it. Remove that API. We'll create a new one called Startup Battle. Hit create. And that code that I just cut and pasted, we actually give that to you as soon as you create the API. By default, we show you how to process, how to do that check in Node, but we also give you PHP code for doing it, as well as C# code right there. And what's kind of cool is it automatically populates in the values for your tenants, which is pretty nice. So now that that is done, let's test it and make sure that we can get a valid token that will let us into our API. So on the test tab, what that's going to do is it's going to show you several different bits of code in different languages of how to get a access token for this specific API. But one nice thing that it does is it automatically generates one for you when you view the test tab, and you can just grab that token like that. Go back to our editor, and in my little samples down here, I can just cut and paste that token right in. And without the token, I get a 401. With the token, I get a 500 internal error. Oh no! What is up with that? Undefined. Incomplete. Why am I getting an error? I should not be getting an error. It's not because I didn't save it, is it? That would be weird. Internal server error. Self, no sniff. Connection closed. Why would that be? Do I still have the app running? Let's restart it. Do have a bunch of unhappy stuff there. So we haven't restarted the server in a while, so I'm going to go ahead and just do that and see if it clears that up. Send the request. Still getting an error. So what have I missed? I do have the Auth0 domain, API audience. Oh, you know what? I did not configure these things in my .env, right? So that's what's going on. So I just need to add those environment variables in there so that the request goes out to the appropriate location. So I need my Auth0 domain, and I need my API audience. So I'm going to pull those out of my settings over here. Here's my audience value. So, and my Auth0 domain I can get from my client env file. And then I know I need to restart because of that. So, Hey, Carrie, thanks for hanging out with us. I really appreciate it. And I will see you around C# Fritz, his channel, and doing some coding with you. Hopefully this was enjoyable for you. And like I said, I'll repost the video on YouTube once we're complete. We're kind of coming in on the home stretch right now. So go ahead and fire that up. I'm going to pop up my REST client, and let's see, do I get an appropriate response? Yes, 401, you're not authorized. My request. And now I get JSON because I have an appropriate bearer token, right? So super cool. Let's go back to the browser and see how that has affected our application though. So we are in the application itself. I am not logged in. I'm going to go to login. I'm logged in. I can go to my private startup battles, but I'm not getting any data. And if you notice down here in our GET request or in our console, we have an error attempting to do a GET request against the private API, and we're getting an unauthorized. And the reason that is that we're not passing along an access token with the request to the private API. So if we go back into our editor, and I'm going to go ahead and close this REST client. Let me back that out. All right, because we know the API is secured appropriately. If we go look at our API service, you remember that we are just using Axios to call the private endpoint, but we actually need to pass that bearer token along with it. But we don't actually have a bearer token at the moment. All we have is an ID token. We don't actually have an access token for our API endpoint. So we need to request that while we're authenticating. And to do that, we're going to go into our auth service. And up here where we configure our scopes, we need to request the audience of our API. That's one thing that we need to do. And then we also need to request a scope to allow us to access that API. So give me just 1 second and I will show you what those values look like. So to begin with, I need to request, I want the audience of our API. And the scope that we're asking for right now, the scopes that we are asking for is just OpenID and profile. And if we go back to our API configuration in here, we can actually define scopes for our API so that someone, the audience is the thing that you're wanting to interact with. Like say you have an application that has user management, you have maybe account management, you have different areas of your application. That's the equivalent of your audience, right? You know, I want a token that is scoped just to my private startup items. But then you can also have scopes that represent, the audience represents the area. Scopes represent the things that you can do inside that area. And I'll just to show you how that works, I will add just a single scope. So I'm going to go ahead and add that. And then when I am requesting scopes in my code from my client side, I'm going to ask for that full access as well. Right, so now let's go back to the application. We're not done yet, but I just want to show you how that changed in the authentication flow. I'll go ahead and get rid of some of this goo because I don't want it. All right, and go into, what don't you like? Cannot read property ID token of undefined. Why would that be there? In what file? Auth.js line 32. Console log. Local login. Why is it calling local login? I don't think it should be. Let's see what happens if we go through the login flow. I can come back and look at that at a later time if it's working the way I want it to. So this is interesting. So we're getting prompted for consent again because we've changed the scopes that we're requesting. Before we were just requesting the user's profile, but now we're requesting the scope of full access. So it prompts me again to get consent to allow that scope. So I'm going to go ahead and allow it. And now the result that we get back from Auth0 not only contains an ID token, but it also now contains an access token. And if we take that access token, let me see, is it going to let me pull that out of there? Can I not just copy the value? Get out of there. Copy. And go to JWT.io. IO. So no, it literally gave me the word access token. Thanks, Chrome. All right. Copy. Here, let's do something else. Go back to the editor. I want to just go ahead and write that out. So auth result. We probably want to save it as well. So this dot access token auth result dot access token. And I need to add a property for it. Token equals null. I'm going to go ahead and log that out to the console. Access token. So, come on back. There's our access token. So I can just grab that now. And we can look at it in JWT.io. So, bam. And now our access token we can see is scoped to the audience of startup battles, and the scope we have full access. So we should be able to take this token and send it to the API, or you guys aren't seeing the browser. There we go. So we now see we have an audience for startup battle. And we have the scope for full access. So we should be able to take this token and use our little handy dandy tester down here. Where'd it go? Use that as our token. And see it actually return a value to us. So send that request. And we do. So it is a valid access token for our API. Now all we have to do is, since we've since we've stored it already in our auth service as the access token, we should be able to consume it in our API calls. So let me pull that up. And I need to pull in my auth. So import auth from auth. Let's see. What don't you like about that? It doesn't like me using commas. That makes sense. Okay. And for our private route, what we want is const headers equals an object like that. And we're going to say headers. It's an object of, let's see, authorization. And that's going to be a bearer. And then we're going to call our auth to get the access token. Like so. And it looks like I don't have that implemented yet, so I'll have to go implement that in our auth service. But really, it's just a getter. It shouldn't be that mysterious. Like so. That's all saved. What don't you like? It doesn't like that I don't have that. What doesn't it like? Unexpected token, get access token. Oh, it's because I haven't implemented it yet. So let's go do it real quick. So I'll just set it right here. Get access token. And I'm going to just return the access token. So expected this. What? Oh, this dot access token. Thank you. Bam. Okay, back over to the API. It is happy with those things. What doesn't it like here? All right, I'm not going to mess with that right now. But we just hand the headers into the Axios call. Like so. What doesn't it like? API. You know what? I'm going to bake the cake again. Copy. There we go. So basically, I am calling the get access token method, constructing a authorization bearer token, and passing it along with the request to the endpoint. And it looks like we have no build failures, so we should see this working again now. If we go back over into our app, refresh, I am going to log out just to make sure I go through the whole flow to make sure I get my appropriate valid tokens. Bam. And now when I go to there, I can view my private data again. And my friends, we have reached the end of the backlog. We have implemented OpenID Connect based authorization in a Vue application, automatic token renewal, explicit logout. We secured our client-side routing, and we secured our backend API. We are done. I'm going to go into the editor, or actually I'll come over here to my terminal, and I'm just going to commit all this and send it up. This add done. And now you guys can go and check out the code. Before I sign off, I'm happy to answer any questions you guys might have. I know I haven't been paying close attention to chat. It is a fine art to do that. I'm not as good as C# Fritz is, but I'm very happy to answer any questions anybody might have. I will give you guys a few seconds to think of those. And I'm going to go get a beverage or something like that. I'll come back, and if nobody has questions, we'll just sign off and find someone to raid. All right, so I will be right back.
Oh my god.
All right, I am back. Hopefully you enjoyed that video of my dog Louie. Apparently he doesn't enjoy it because I can hear him barking. He has been in his crate in my bedroom this entire 2.5 hours, so he's not a happy dog. It doesn't look like anybody had any specific questions about what I covered today. I hope you found it, entertaining in the least. And if you're ever implementing this sort of authentication in Vue, you now know repo you can go check out to see the code that's necessary to do it. Let's check Twitch and see if there's anybody out there streaming right now that we can raid. I'm not sure how many people I have, but it looks like a lot of people, so someone might appreciate that. Give me just a second. Anybody know if anyone is on right now? Let's see. Looks like Eleface is on. Why don't we raid Eleface? That sounds fun. All right, so Eleface, and I am setting up that raid. And thank you all for joining me. Keep your eyes on my Twitter. That's where I'll announce the next time I'll be streaming. And thanks for being here. I'll catch you next time.